You are watching a Healing Element podcast special. Show your support by subscribing to the Healing Element podcast YouTube channel. Also, follow us on Instagram at the Healing Element Podcast. Hello and welcome to the Healing Element Podcast. I'm your host, Kai Marie. I have a very special guest with me. He is back, Thurston Smith, back by popular demand. And so we're happy to have him back. Today's topic is Beyond a Movement, the history of policing in America and the rights of Black Americans. And before we jump into the conversation today, I would like you to just take a moment and look at the image that's in front of you. And just as we start to have this conversation, we really wanted to put image to the language that we'll be speaking on today and that Thurston will be breaking down for us as far as the history of police and Black Americans. So, and this is an image that Thurston had provided for us just to show kind of what we're going to be talking about and how deep this history runs between our community, the Black community, and police. So today, as I said, Thurston will provide us with a look into the history of policing in America and how the creation of this system has impacted the lives of Black Americans. He will also provide us with tips and strategies to use when engaging with law enforcement. Thurston, welcome back to the program. It's a pleasure to have you back.
Thank you, Kai. Good to see you.
Yes. So
good to be back with you. Thanks again for the invitation.
Oh, of course. You're always welcome on the podcast. So for those that did not catch the last time that you were on, the last time we had a conversation regarding breaking the generational cycle of substance use. And that was an interview that struck a chord with many people. And I had a lot of positive feedback as far as the information that you provided. So I know that the same is going to hold true today. But if this is your first time joining the Healing Element Podcast and you missed the last interview that I did with Thurston, here's a little bit of his background as it relates to the criminal justice system. So Thurston was appointed by the Tennessee House of Representatives to the Tennessee Community Resource Board for the Department of Corrections. He's a former chair of the Shelby County Juvenile Justice Consortium, served 3 terms on the CJJC. He's a former case manager for the Court Services and Offender Supervision Agency Reentry and Sanction Center, CSOSA, in Washington, D.C. He's a graduate of the Leadership Memphis and American Leadership Forum Criminal and Juvenile Justice Cohort. Policy advisor to members of the Tennessee State Senate and Tennessee House of Representatives. He provided testimony before members of the U.S. Congressional Black Caucus, Political Education and Leadership Institute regarding criminal justice sentencing disparities. Served as a consultant and trainer for Federal Bureau of Prisons, U.S. Attorney's Office, U.S. Probation Office, and a host of state correctional institutions. He served as an adjunct faculty in the Department of Education, Criminal Justice, and Human Services for Southwest Tennessee Community College. He provided testimony before members of the Tennessee State Legislature and Tennessee Black Caucus on juvenile justice policy reform. Also a juvenile justice and youth advocate and drug court and reentry program surveyor for CARF International. Impressive resume, and just the person that we need to have the conversation today.
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting. Since you went through that glowing list of biographical data, it's important to note that I've got some personal experiences with the criminal justice system as well. So add that to the list of credentials.
Yeah, and I think that's so important because you're going to be able to provide us with not only the history, but a well-rounded view of the system as it stands today. And that's extremely important. So I'm excited to have the conversation. You and I have discussed this before offline. And as we both kind of thought, this was definitely a conversation that needed to take place for our community, not only knowing the history, but what to do when we have a situation where we are engaging with law enforcement. So we'll jump right in. The movement that inspired, there was a movement, I should say, that was inspired by the unfortunate murder of George Floyd. And it seemed as though because of that incident, something was sparked globally, not only in America, but around the world. And for the first time I can remember, even on LinkedIn, I saw people in our community posting, "I'm not okay today. Like, I'm tired, I'm exhausted." And that was the first time that I saw us really expressing how we were feeling for anybody, for people, for coworkers, for anybody that we had any type of communication with. Usually it's stuff that we either keep to ourselves, close-knit circle, being friends and family. So what do you think it was, Thurston, regarding what happened to George Floyd that really sparked this movement and really starting some more in-depth conversations about policing in the Black community?
Well, thanks again for having me on your podcast, Kai. Well, I think you actually summed it up yourself in your question. These feelings, as it relates to the maltreatment, the mistreatment, the oppressive practices, discrimination as it relates to African Americans, has been growing for years and years and years, and we're actually talking about centuries. We're not talking about mild incidences of abuse or isolated incidences of discriminatory practices. We're talking about something that is maladaptive, something that is pervasive, and something that has been going on for far too long. And it's interesting that in your lead-in question, Kai, how you referenced that it actually became a world movement. So let's look at that. Even other countries, those countries outside of the United States have been aware and cognizant of the racial discrimination and practices that have been going on in America as it relates to African Americans, as it relates to Black people and other people of color for years. So it's interesting that we had a rally cry that was felt as far as, Tunisia. We had people in Great Britain and France and Germany rallying for justice in America. So I think that's that whole movement was indicative of the problems that we have been experiencing in the United States for far too long.
No, I agree with that. And I think, too, the fact that we as a community started to speak on it. And some people I know that they were concerned. They said, listen, I know me being vocal about this issue, it may affect my employment, but I cannot remain silent. So I think that push also helped with really sparking this conversation. Is that something that you would also agree with?
Well, and absolutely. And just like the title of today's podcast, Beyond a Movement, well, it is beyond the movement. And it's very important that in this discussion that you and I are having this afternoon, that we place it in its everything, the framework of our discussion within the proper historical context. So we can go as far back as Reconstruction. We can go as far back as, let's take a look at 1865, right nearing the end of the Civil War. We had President Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation, which was the catalyst for the freedom of 4 million slaves. What we saw immediately after that was the establishment of what was referred to back then, Kai, as the Black Codes. Now, the first two states to enact Black Codes were South Carolina and Mississippi. So let me tell you what these Black Codes were, the framework of these Black Codes. The Black Codes were established to keep African Americans subservient and beholden to either their former slaveholders or either some other white person. I mean, what black person? So some other individual. So let me give you an example of what these slave codes were. One was African Americans black people would be stopped at will, not just by law enforcement officials, but any white person, and asked to produce working papers. And if they did not have working papers, then they were jailed, or they were either coerced, if you will, to go work on a plantation for somebody else. This is precisely why, even despite the Emancipation Proclamation, even despite the emancipation of 4 million slaves during that era, many of those individuals that were given their freedom were still enslaved. Those Black Codes later turned into what later became what we understand today in the historical context as Jim Crow laws. But they did the same thing. African Americans during that era were not allowed to hold any other job unless that job was in agriculture. Thus, cotton, sugar, that type of thing. And you have to understand, back during that era, cotton was the GDP during that time. That was the gross domestic product of that era, particularly within the southern states. And so these practices, when we talk about the history of policing in America as it relates to African American communities, the practices that we see today in many shape, form, and fashions mimic the practices of yesteryear during that era in the 18th century, so on and so forth. Practices within the 1800s. So when we saw that the movement that was sparked by that incident with George Floyd, what we saw was an expression of deep-seated hurt, anger, frustration, fear, all that has been passed on from generation to generation. You are well noted in your work, Kai, surrounding generational trauma. Well, African Americans in America are victims of generational trauma. And it's so interesting because the majority, even though African Americans were given various rights throughout the years, there have been policies that have been implemented to either impede, hinder, or neutralize the policies that actually gave us our freedom. Does that make sense? And it's kind of interesting. There are three predominant policies that continue to prove problematic for African Americans, or historically have proven problematic for African Americans. One is the U.S. government's housing policy. Two is the U.S. government's education policies. And lastly, which is the focal point of our discussion this evening, is the U.S. government's criminal justice policies. Rarely does the United States government set on a policy trajectory or a policy pathway and does not see that policy to fruition. This is precisely why when we look at Nixon's war on drugs in 1971, there was a direct increase in drug abuse within African American communities in New York, Philadelphia, Los Angeles, Atlanta, Georgia, other major metropolises throughout the United States that were in direct proportion to the civil rights movement. Even if we, and I'm not being a wise guy, even if we look at the movie New Jack City and we look at the words of Wesley Snipes, AKA Nino Brown, he told you he made it real clear. He said, ain't no Uzis made in Harlem, and not one of us owns a poppy field. So let's be real clear about that. In fact, Maxine Waters was on a campaign, I seem to recall approximately 10 to 15 years ago, where she had come across some data that substantiated that it was actually the federal government that actually flooded Los Angeles with narcotics during that time. So, this is a real, a very sensitive discussion that we're having, but it's one that needs to be had.
No, I totally agree. And for those that are listening, please make sure that you give this video a thumbs up. Thurston's going to be providing some important information for us as a community. So as you engage with our live streaming tonight, that will help to boost the video to make sure that the information gets out to as many people as possible. So please make sure you give the video a thumbs up. Also share and subscribe to the Healing Element podcast. That'd be very much appreciated. And so when you were talking about, Thurston, what was happening in the government's involvement with drugs going into our community, I think there's actually a Netflix special, if I'm not mistaken, and people that are watching, please, I can't remember the name of it. I am intending to watch that, but I think it may speak to exactly what you just brought up. Are you familiar with that, the documentary?
Which one are you talking about, Tom?
It's a Netflix special, and I think it's about drugs being, the whole network of drugs being pushed into the African-American community. I believe it's relatively new, but when you had spoke on that, as far as the work that Maxine Waters has done, it made me think of that Netflix special that's on there. So I definitely want to check that out. Anyone who's listening, if you know the name of the special, please drop it in the comments section.
Well, I'm going to be hunting for it as soon as we're done.
Yeah. I haven't, like I said, I haven't watched it yet, but I look forward to doing it.
Yeah, I definitely want to see that. But going back even to when we look at the history of discriminatory policies and practices as it relates to African Americans, it's sinister. I mean, it's just sinister. And probably the most painful thing about it is when we try to have meaningful dialogues and discussions, right, with our white brothers and sisters, right? We're frequently met with the three cousins of denial, as I refer to it. I'm a therapist, so I got to bring psychology into this discussion. We're often met with the three cousins of denial: minimization, it's not that bad; rationalization, right? Black people owned slaves, or black people sold us into slavery. So you hear that one, or justification. So it's either you minimize it, to make it less severe than what it really is. You rationalize the actions behind it, and then you give justification of why it occurred. And this is precisely why we continue to have this discussion over and over and over again. And not to go on a tangent, every day this week they have been talking about on the news about all of these attacks against Asian Americans. And I mean, it's ridiculous. You just see all of these unwarranted attacks on old people, old Chinese people or whatever, part of Asia they may be from. They could be from Japan or, Taiwan or, or just senseless. And there's this growing angst. There's this growing trend within this country that is especially targeted toward people of color. And obviously Asian Americans fit into that paradigm of people of color. And it seems to be worsening.
Yes, I've seen, and I apologize, guys. I think there may be a small delay on my end. So just so that you know, this is technology. So no, you raised a good point. And so I think this is why this conversation is so important to have right now, because we've always seen in history that when anytime there's more, how do I want to say, conservation of resources, we always start, that kind of corresponds with an uptick of racial incidents.
Exactly. And you would have to ask yourself, any decent or sensible human being you would have to ask yourself, what is it that makes someone have that kind of hatred and disdain within their heart towards another human being that's done absolutely no harm to them? And one of the things, and I know you understand this because you work in the field of counseling as I do, and it's dysfunctional, and that's because that's what we're getting at. It is so dysfunctional and so pervasive. Racism is just as much a part of the American culture and fiber as hot dogs. Okay, right? And one of the things about when you stay in an abusive relationship, and this will allow us to get into the meat of the discussion that we're going to be having. When you stay within an abusive relationship, the victim begins to self-implode. The victim begins to participate in destructive acts that are self-harming, so thus are self-destructive. And we've seen examples of this time and time again within the Black community. So there's a great deal of psychology that's involved in the history of racism, the history of discrimination, the history of oppression in the United States of America. So let me tell you a brief story. A friend of mine and I were in Brooklyn. My friend found out that we could get some pro-kids for a significant reduced price if we went to Flatbush. So he knew where to go. So we got on the train and we got on the train and went from East New York section of Brooklyn to Flatbush. So got off the train and he knew the location of the store, got a couple of blocks down, heading toward the store, and we heard these guys, calling us the N-word, get out of our neighborhood, da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. So, and there were lots of them. They started throwing bottles at us, though, that kind of thing. Made it to the store just in time before they closed. It was a bad night. They had some sneakers left, but they didn't have any in our size. He and I had a dilemma, right? The dilemma was, how are we going to get back to the train station? Any other direction that we went would have placed us deeper into their community. So the only logical alternative that we had was to head back in the same direction, but to walk on the opposite side of the street. Well, lo and behold, they saw us. They got in cars, they got on top of cars, they got on foot, probably about 25, 30 of them. And we had a bad night. The next thing I knew is that I was being held down on the ground with a 38 caliber gun to my head by a plainclothes white police officer. Now you got to understand, didn't I tell you that my father was a New York City law enforcement officer? And the reason why I referenced that is just to give the audience some idea that I was raised in a decent family. I had money. Wasn't rich, but I had money. We wasn't up there stealing. You understand? That's only one of several incidences that I have had with law enforcement in the United States. That was up north. Let me give you another instance. My first counseling course was at, and I'm going to put the name out there, was at Trident Technical College on Rivers Avenue in Charleston, South Carolina. Trident Technical College has 3 campuses. The North Campus, which is on Rivers Avenue, the main campus, which is on Palmer Avenue, downtown Charleston, and then they had a satellite office in Goose Creek, South Carolina. This was my first class in health and human services because I was pursuing my career in counseling. The class was televised. About 10 or 15 minutes into the professor's introduction into the course and introducing herself to all of the students, the campus police come into the classroom, drag me out of the classroom during a televised session. Why? Because they said some black guy stole a pocketbook 1 or 2 weeks before. Now, you see, that was long time ago. I didn't have the political savvy nor wherewithal, and you know, I wasn't as mature, is what I'm trying to say, back then as I am now. Had I been, I would have sued them, but I didn't. That's number 2 incident. So I've given you 2 instances of police brutality that I've experienced. One in the north, right? One in New York City, and then the other in the heart of the South. There are 5 states that are classified as the Deep South: South Carolina, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, and Louisiana. Just so everybody knows. Tennessee may be in the South, but it's not classified as the Deep South. And we have to remember that the first shots of the Civil War began in South Carolina. So that's part of the history. But when African Americans, when we look at the incident with George Floyd, and we saw the response by many people, and now we had some white Americans, right? Let's be real clear, that were just as angry or displayed a level of anger that was appreciative for us. But then we also know there was a response by a large segment of white America with this attitude: here they go again. What they complaining about? You know, that kind of denial. It's like, how do you navigate through that? Over aggressive police practices within major cities within the United States. These are the culprits. We went through the Ahmaud. It was one incident after the other during the past. I mean, one incident after the other. In fact, there's been so much police brutality as it relates to Black people in America, to where by and large, Kyle, Black people have become somewhat desensitized to it. It's like normal to us. It's going on so much. And to be quite frank with you, it has gone on so frequent that many people are numb to it. But then when we see the response, or when we saw the response following the George Floyd incident, many people want to slip into denials like, well, where did this come from? Why are they so angry? You know, these types of real ridiculous responses. But you know, we have a society that is in denial about race. And that, that's something that we need to hone in on, something that we need to discuss more intelligently, and something that we need to bring to the forefront and not buy into this thing. Well, why are you talking about it? It's not important, or the more you talk about it, the more problems. That sounds like alcoholism. Just like the individual that you have in the family that suffers from alcoholism or drug addiction. You don't let anybody know about it. Just pretend that it doesn't exist. Maybe it'll go away. You know the story.
It's so true. And even after all of the reports that come out regarding the race disparities that exist in every area, whether it's health, as you had mentioned earlier, education, housing, you have so many reports that show that the underlying issue is race, but still there's an avoidance to address it.
Absolutely.
with all the data that exists.
Right. Let's talk a little bit before we get further into the realm of criminal justice. Let's go to 1934, 1933, 1934, under Franklin Delano Roosevelt. That was the president then, right? He established the housing authority, and I forget the exact term. It was Department of Housing Administration, something to that effect, right? And in 1934, they rolled out policies. They rolled out guidelines to the banking industry where they actually used color codes, maps, a geographical framework that allowed them to finance mortgages, finance housing projects. And when I say projects, not buildings, but, to erect homes is what I'm speaking of. Within white neighborhoods, on the map, they would red out all of the Black communities. That is the history of the term that we refer today as redlining. It was the same policies that they used to run highways through Black communities. And they utilized those highways to separate Black communities from white communities. This is precisely why housing policy has been just as much of a culprit to the progress of African Americans as the other policies have been. This is why when we began this discussion, why I talked about three predominant policy areas: housing, education, and criminal justice. And obviously, criminal justice seals the deal because it is the most destructive set of policies that the United States government has enacted that disproportionately affects African Americans. Let's take a look at the 13th Amendment. So let's go back to 1865, 1866, 13th Amendment ratified. So let me tell you what the clause states. With the exception of involuntary servitude or slavery, is what it says, quote, involuntary servitude or slavery, excluding criminal offenses, there shall be no slavery. Now, let me say that to you again. Involuntary servitude or slavery, with the exception of criminal offenses, it is against the law to enslave somebody. So, I cannot tell you how many African Americans were arrested. See, if we go back to the black codes, if black people during that era if they didn't acquiesce to what white folks wanted them to do, they put them in jail. And guess what they did in jail? Guess what the major prison industries were in Southern prisons? Texas, Tennessee, South Carolina, Mississippi, Alabama, Louisiana, agriculture. All about economics. So when black folks talk about reparations, oh, we are way overdue. Way overdue. Everywhere we turn, even after the Emancipation Proclamation, we will still beholden to them, still the major economic driving force for America, and definitely in the South, through criminal justice policies. So you're free on paper, but you're not free. And here's the other thing. Even after the federal government made their various revisions or amendments to not just the 13th Amendment, but also the 14th and 15th Amendment, the federal government wasn't coming to the South, making people in the South do right by black people. I mean, do you understand what I'm saying? You understand? So by and large, black people did what white folks told them to do. That's the history of that's our history in America.
Thurston, thank you so much for breaking that down. You all who are listening, I think it's so important that we go back in history to understand, to really have an understanding as to how we arrived at the point where we are right now. So if you are enjoying the dialogue tonight, please make sure you hit the like button and also share this in your networks, because we will be getting into strategies that we should use as a community when we are engaging with law enforcement. There is one thing I wanted to mention, Thurston, and you had spoke about it, as far as us becoming numb to what we're seeing, because we're seeing, unfortunately, the death of so many of our members of our community at the hands of police officers, and right. This feeling of being numb to seeing it and the danger of that. And I wanted to share, you shared one of your stories, a few stories of your encounters, and I wanted to share one with you, and then talk about, to talk a little bit more about that mental and emotional, that trauma that can occur out of this. So this happened a few years ago. This is when I was living in Connecticut, and I worked in New York City. Actually, me and my fiance and I, we both worked in New York City, lived in Connecticut. So we would take the train in to New York City every day. So we got off the train. It was the evening, it was winter. So it was probably close to 8 o'clock, dark already, because it was in the winter months. So we went to our car that was parked in the station, in a train station, outside, an outside train station. So we went to the car did not start, right? So Dwayne, my fiance, he gets out the car, pops the hood to see what's going on. And it seems as though it could be a battery issue, right? So I'm in the car, and during that time, as most times, there was a lot of incidents being shared on social media as far as with police and our community. So he was outside. I said, well, I'll get out and help. Now, mind you, I know absolutely nothing about cars. So I was not getting out to help anything, because I had no idea what I was looking for. So I got out to help. And so I was like, what can I do? He's like, well, just at least use your phone to shine the light down into the underneath the hood, so that way he can get a better idea of what he had to do to fix the problem. So while we were there, a cop drove up. So we were facing away from the road. So the back of our vehicle was towards the main road, and the cop was on the main road. And so I poked my head up. I just had a sense someone was there. I just get a sense. So I looked up and I was like, I saw it was a police officer. So I told Dwayne, I was like, Dwayne, there's a cop. He pulled up and he's just sitting there. So Dwayne's like, all right, don't worry about it. We'll just, figure out what's going on in the car so we can get home. So the police officer then takes one of the bright lights in his vehicle and shines it over at us and says, is everything okay over here? But it wasn't in a tone of concern. Right? It was in a tone of, why are you here? Now, right. The place that we would take the train to and from to work, it was in a relatively affluent part of Connecticut, right? So I told Dwayne, I said, Dwayne, don't move. I'm going to slowly raise up a little bit so I can let the cop know we're just having car trouble. Right. So he said, okay. So I stood up and I said, sir, we're going to be out of here. I yelled back to him. I wasn't going to walk towards him. I just yelled back to him and said, all right, we're just having car trouble. He didn't respond. He just kept the light on us and sat in his car. So I started to get concerned. I said, why is he still sitting here? Right. And Dwayne's like, don't worry about it. So he continues to sit there and he yells again, is everything okay over here? So it's like, I just told this guy that we're having car trouble. So now I'm getting worried because I'm like, is he trying to make this into something else? So again, I told Dwayne, I was like, you don't move. Whatever you do, don't move. We're not going to do any subtle movements. And so I yelled again. I said, sir, we're going to be out of here soon. We're having car trouble. No response. Just keep shining the light and just sitting there. So Dwayne's like, I don't know, I'll yell. And I said, okay, if you turn around, just move slow. And we were trying to figure out what do we need to do, right?
Exactly, so, not because of your car trouble, but because of the police officer.
Right, and it's dark, right? He's just flashing this light. He's not getting out of his car. He's not saying anything else to us. So Dwayne just turns around. He just turns his head. He keeps his hands on the vehicle. And he says, sir, we'll be out of here soon. The cop still is just sitting there. So I was like, Dwayne, is he calling for backup? I don't understand why he's still here.
Right.
So we were done. So Dwayne fixed what he had to do in the car. Thurston, I was terrified to move to go back into the car. So we stayed there under the hood until the cop drove away. Then we got in the car. By then I was rattled. Right. Because I've seen so many images of things going really wrong. So I wanted, and after that, really quick, and I'm wrapping up because I really want to get your perspective on this. After that happened, because of so many other incidents I've had and then that recent one compared to also what I was seeing played out on social media, anytime a cop car would come behind me, I would freeze. Now, it's not safe to do that while driving. So I wanted to know if you could talk a little bit about that health part of it.
I sure can. And I want the audience to hear this. And I want your white audience to hear this. Because we have two different sets of experiences in America. And we need to make that really clear. By and large, right? And we're not going to I'm not going to be dissuaded by we got good cops. I'm not going to get into that discussion, right? By and large, police officers have an adversarial relationship with Black folks. They have historically, they have ever since Reconstruction, all the way up to the 21st century. So let's be really clear about that. This is precisely why I'm working and supporting several initiatives in the community of Memphis, Tennessee, that directly calls for having police officers assigned to the Black community from the Black community. So you have to look at this. Here's the psychology. Number one, people bring who they are into every relationship. We take everywhere I go, there I am, right? You understand? Everywhere I go, there I am. So whoever you are, you take who you are into your work, into your play, into all your relationships. So if you're a racist, that's going to come out. That's who you are. And that horrible incident that you experienced is commonplace for many of us as relates to our encounters with police. And when we say police, we're really talking about white police officers. That's my experience. Law-abiding citizen. And we're always in the position with them where we have to explain ourselves. And I'm a little tired of that, right? Isn't that indicative? Doesn't that mimic the same examples that I gave you when we discussed the black codes? This is why policing back then, policing now mimics policing back then. So secondly, we need to have police officers in our communities that represent our communities. We don't need white police officers policing black neighborhoods. Or at least we don't need white police officers policing black neighborhoods who do not have a relationship with those communities. It's kind of interesting. My father was a law enforcement officer. His friends would come by, stop by, that kind of thing. But I would go into other neighborhoods, affluent neighborhoods, and I was in a generally middle class section of Brooklyn, although 2 blocks down was the ghetto, right? But I would go to affluent neighborhoods, and the police officers within white neighborhoods know the whole community. They have relationships with everybody in the community. They have a relationship with the drugstore owner. They have a relationship with the liquor store owner. They have a relationship with the pastor. They have a relationship with the shoe repair guy. They have a relationship with the automotive shop down the street on Main Street. Do you understand? Not in the black community. Our communities are disjointed, and they are disjointed not because black people are animals, not because black people don't have any vision or don't want to do any better. We have those problems in our communities because of policies that were put in place that prevent us from moving forward. That bottom line. That's why the African American community is in the condition that it's in now. So we don't need any more over aggressive policing in the black community. We can't walk, we can't jog, we can't sit, you can't even be a black bird watcher in Central Park. Now I want you to understand the historical pedigree of this discussion I'm having with you. Here there's a white woman in Central Park with a dog that calls the police on a black man, tells all of these lies. Now, how does she know that she could get away with that? She intuitively knew that she could call the police, say it's a black guy, and have the police respond. White folks know that. They know how to push that card. And they've been doing it for years. They've been doing it for years as it relates to us. And it continued. These practices continue to put us in an adversarial role with white Americans. We don't want to be in an adversarial position with white folks. I don't, and I don't believe you do. But those practices that we continue to experience in America time and time and time again continues to do that. You cannot be friends with people that you know despise you. You cannot be friends or have a loving relationship with a group of people that continue to show disdain toward your humanity. That's the reality of living in America. And the criminal justice system needs to be entirely overhauled. And we haven't even got into the crux of the challenges within that system. And it begins with over-aggressive policing in Black communities. We are constantly in a position when it comes to our interactions with, if I can give you 10 instances of encounters that I've had with law enforcement, 10, maybe 1 out of the 10 was good. And I'm just telling you. And I think if we were able to do a poll with your audience, well, your Black audience, right? Because I'm sure that's not the experience of your white audience, right? But I'm sure if we were able to do a poll, I'm sure the numbers would pretty much be consistent in terms of Black males, particularly African-American males, as relates to encounters with white officers. And police officers today, going forward, need to be vetted, meaning that they need to do a psychological profile on them. They do psychological profiles on high-ranking law enforcement officers within the federal government. They do psychological profiles on people that work in the intelligence community. And I don't see why they should not do a more effective and comprehensive job of vetting law enforcement officers. A study came out last week that talked about that the FBI report, not a study, a report just came out from the Federal Bureau of Investigation validating racism within law enforcement agencies. Something that we've been talking about. I mean, like, really? Something that we've been talking about for years. So now here's the FBI telling us that America's police departments are plagued with racism. Well, the FBI was part of it. We can go as far back as COINTELPRO. J. Edgar Hoover served under 8 presidents. The only FBI director to serve under that many presidential administrations. Wikipedia will tell you, during the civil rights movement, J. Edgar Hoover said, you will subvert, neutralize, and disenfranchise the following groups, individuals, and organizations: Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, the NAACP, Malcolm X, Huey P. Newton, Black Panther Party, Martin Luther King, all of them. And there was a direct influx of drugs within major metropolises in Black communities, knowing full well that we're not the ones that brought that in. Nixon had a commission immediately before the establishment of the White House Special Action on Drug Abuse. And by the way, Nixon's White House Special Action on Drug Abuse Prevention was the precursor to what we now know to be the White House Office of National Drug Control Policy. So you need to understand this. This is precisely why I said at the beginning of this, rarely does the federal government start on a policy trajectory and does not finish it. And it doesn't make a difference what presidential administration is it. If Nixon set the policy ball in motion of criminalizing Black people, and it has continued all the way up to the Obama administration. And we need to understand the history of that. It went from Nixon to Ford to Carter to Reagan to Bush to Clinton. 3 strikes out. Clinton validated that whole policy trajectory that was started way back within the Clinton administration. We need to understand that. That's how deep the rabbit hole goes. And here's the interesting thing. The White House Office of National Drug Control Policy, historically known under the Nixon administration as the White House Special Action Office for Drug Prevention, sets the nation's drug control strategy and directs the U.S. Department of Health. Even though it's a White House office and it's an executive branch, it also has influence over funding in the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. But guess what? Historically, 50% of the budget of the White House Office of National Drug Control Policy has gone to law enforcement, not drug prevention, not drug treatment, has gone to locking people up, securing, the prison industry and everything involved in that. Do you understand? So Nixon was told after the establishment of the commission that he had in 1970, they did several focus groups around the country, and even white people during that time told President Nixon that they needed to focus more attention on drug treatment. That's not what he did. He focused more attention on locking up Black people in African-American communities. That's the history.
Power. Thank you so much, Thurston, for breaking all of that down. Important history for us to know. So please, again, make sure that you are sharing this information with friends and with family. And to your point, Thurston, when you said as far as how when drugs was ravishing our community, how we were treated versus right now we're talking more, there's more conversation over the last several years about the opiate addiction. And we saw how that was really at one point more so in suburbia, right? And I saw when I worked in government, I saw a lot of just in the way in which that was handled. We got to get these people counseling. We have to make sure that there's community services. I mean, the thought process and the thoughtfulness of how to treat people that had and who used opiates, completely different from what we saw in our community.
Right. And I was appointed. I served on the Shelby County Opioid Task Force, and let me tell you, I took some hits, but I took some hits from people in the Black community who number one, really didn't know my background. Number two, really didn't know what I was doing on the opioid task force. By and large, I was the only person on that opioid task force here in Memphis, Tennessee, here in Shelby County, that was advocating for equitable treatment. And I made it really clear, right? I made it really clear. We had a press conference with the DA and the mayor and members of the Shelby County Commission and the county sheriff and so on and so forth, that when, number one, a drug is a drug is a drug. You understand that, kind, because you work in the same field that I do. We don't differentiate. It's no special drugs. I told Rush Limbaugh that, right? God bless him. Because Rush Limbaugh had an opiate addiction. But there's no difference. There's, the brain does not differentiate between drugs you get from a doctor from drugs you get off the street. And heroin is an opiate. Dilaudid is an opiate. One you got over the counter, one you got from a dealer. Doesn't make a difference. The body's response to dope is the body's response to dope. Makes no difference. It's packaging. And so here, what we experienced, and the African American community was raising hell, and they had the right to raise hell, and I was raising hell with them. Here we're talking about, I sat in a meeting in 2019 in Memphis, Tennessee, Shelby County Commission, when I heard a chief law enforcement officer say, "We can't arrest our way out of this." And I looked at him and I said, that's real interesting. And I said, we need to have a little bit conversation about it. You can't arrest your way out of addiction to cocaine or any other drug. It's all a public health. Before the coronavirus, America's #1 public health crisis is addiction. Folks need to understand it. Costing us somewhere in the ballpark of $450 billion a year in criminal justice costs, loss of work productivity, and loss of income fed into the general economy. If you don't believe me, you can. That data is easy to pull up. You can go to the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, or you can go to the Justice Department to get that data. But here we had key members, key policy influences within the state of Tennessee talking about we can't arrest our way out. And I said, I believe you and I agree with you. But how come your policy approach was different to drugs that are more common in the Black community? And that goes back to my testimony before the U.S. Congressional Black Caucus, which dealt specifically with the sentencing disparities between powder cocaine versus crack cocaine. Understand that they are the same drug. Only thing you need to do to turn powder cocaine into crack cocaine is some baking soda, some water, and a little heat. And that's it. It is the same drug. It's not a different drug. It's not a variant. It is the same identical drug. Yet the sentencing disparities were 100 to 1. No. I want to say that again. Sentencing disparities for crack cocaine versus powder cocaine was 100 to 1. Obama chopped that down by like 90%. With the, I think Obama's executive action was the Fair Sentencing Act, if I'm correct. I got so many public policy, laws in my head. Sometimes I get them confused. And so the audience needs to know, and the Black community needs to know that Obama did great work as it relates to the criminal justice reform, what he could. So interesting, what Obama was able to accomplish during his administration was accomplished primarily through executive action. But what Trump was able to accomplish during his administration was through congressional legislation that he took credit for. He took credit for Obama's trajectory, because if you were really interested in criminal justice reform, why did y'all fight Obama on what he asked you to do in the legislature? They didn't pass it in the legislature during the Obama administration, but during the last administration. So we have to watch that. And that's why people need to really pay attention to public policy. Forget about what you think about politics. Watch the policy. Watch who's passing what legislation and understand what's behind that legislation. We need an entire reform of America's criminal justice system from top to bottom, and it begins with the local police departments. And what your audience also needs to understand is that the federal government has little or no impact on criminal justice policy on the state level. That's state law. Now, what legislators may do, and what we hope that many of them will do, is if they see a trajectory, a positive trajectory in public policy on the federal level as it relates to criminal justice policy, hopefully good legislators like our own legislator in the legislators I can think of that are criminal justice advocates in Tennessee, like Tennessee Senator Brenda Gilmore, Tennessee Senator Ramesh Akbari, just to name two. Those are two criminal justice pioneers in the state of Tennessee that are studying federal policies. One of the, I think, President Biden, in the first week of his administration, initiated executive action to halt contracts between the federal government and private prisons. Federal government should never establish public-private partnerships in criminal justice, because think about this. And you don't even have to be a rocket scientist to figure this out. If you have a business, and your business is criminal justice kind, then what's your marketing strategy, right? So if your business is criminal justice and you are the director or owner or stakeholder in a private prison, your marketing strategy is to keep that private prison full, right? How do you do that? That's your marketing strategy. And so, I thank God that the new administration has lots of talent there, and they know that the private prison industry has been nothing but an extension of an already existing racist system to keep Black people locked up. That's it.
So true, Thurston. I think that, what you're saying, it all relates back to what you said when we opening the conversation, which was we have to, as a country, acknowledge the race issue in this country, or else we're just going to keep going around the same thing over and over again, and it's gonna pop up again. Just it's gonna manifest itself differently.
Can I tell you a story?
Mm-hmm.
See if you believe this, and it fits right in with our discussion. In 2017, I was invited to do a presentation and provide brief testimony before the Tennessee State Legislature and the Tennessee Black Caucus addressing juvenile justice policy. I initiated the delegation, I coordinated the delegation, and I led the delegation from Memphis, Tennessee to Nashville, which is approximately a 3 hour and 15-minute drive from where I am now to the Tennessee State Capitol. Upon arriving there, we had a meeting with the Lieutenant Governor. Now, I'm the delegation leader, so I have to share this, which is kind of funny. The Lieutenant Governor deferred all of his body language, all of his comments to my white colleague that was in the group. I'll never forget that. Do you understand what I'm trying to tell you? I'm the one that led the delegation there. I'm the one that did the paperwork. I'm the one whose name was on top of it. You understand? Met with the state's lieutenant governor. I'm gonna give him a pass. I'm not gonna call his name, right? Deferred all of his comments, all of his questions to my white colleague that was part of the delegation. Never forgot that. Dealing with juvenile justice policy. So this is the reason why I'm sharing this with you. And obviously, there's some irony there, but I'm sharing this with you is that I want your white viewers to understand that this is what Black people have to deal with everywhere we go. So here, as professional as I am, and I know I didn't go up there unless I was in a suit, right? My nails were done, right? Shoes were shined. I think I was looking pretty good. I even got some pictures from when I was up there, right? So here I am, and you don't get to go up there without those people vetting you, So you got formal background checks, and then you got the informal one. I'm sure that they did both before I was allowed to roam up in that Capitol. But you get my point? So even with an upstanding public service record, I still have to become second in my own project. That's the kind of stuff. And Black people deal with this all the time. We deal with it so much that we don't even bother talking to white people about it, or even talking to each other about it, because we become, to some degree, we become desensitized to it. But it was just so funny. I was up there on criminal justice matters. We're talking about criminal justice, but even in that process, I had to deal with microaggressions and subtle racial overtones in that process. I never forget that.
I'm glad that you shared that, and because what you're saying reminds me of, there's a gentleman, Neely Fuller, and he wrote a book, which is what is it? It's the Code of Conduct. The name is escaping me right now, but it talks about the system that we live in and how we must kind of develop our own code to live in the system. And I'm going to use this to kind of go into our conversation about how we as a community need to, when we are engaged with police officers, how we must present ourselves. And I understand, what we've talked about as far as what the law enforcement has to do, but it still goes back to that same conversation as Thurston first said. We have to deal with that issue of racism in addition to everything else that you've laid out as far as that reform that has to take place. So those that are listening, and hopefully you've paid close attention to everything that Thurston has said, but especially this part, because this is information that you also want to pass on to your children. The historical part, of course, but also encounters with police officers. And I bring up Neely Fuller because he always says, because of the system that we're in, there's a way that we have to conduct ourselves. That's just what it is, right? Because you don't know what police officer you may encounter that day. So Thurston, I wanted to know, you did this great presentation as far for juvenile justice. And one day I know I put you on the spot now, I'd love for you to present on that one as well. But you provided some great strategies. So I wanted to go through a few of those strategies, if you can kind of go a little bit more in depth. And if you are listening to this, you may want to grab a pen, paper, just to make note of what Thurston is providing with us. As you can tell, he has a wealth of information about this topic. So the first is strategies for police encounters, and these are tips for drivers.
Well, wow. Pull over, number one, pull over into a well-lit area, if you're able to do that. And the reality of it is, individuals may find the police behind them, and let's just say, God forbid, in some real dark area within any given community, or the lights are not working well, or the lights are out. And the last thing I would want to tell somebody is to keep driving until you get to a well-lit area. Because I doing that may frustrate the officer even more. Do you see where I'm going with this? And just by virtue of us having this discussion should tell you that we have significant, not a little problem, not an every now and then problem. We have a significant problem in the United States. But number one, pull into a well-lit area. Number two, if you have someone with you, ask them to record the entire encounter. If you don't, and you have a phone, call somebody and let them know where you're at. If you can make 2 phone calls, let them know where you're at. In fact, one strategy, believe it or not, may actually be to call the police yourself. I know that may sound totally crazy to some people, but one strategy may be to call the sheriff's department or dial 911 yourself, because that way there's another record of, do you understand? And you have to, and that's why it's called tips and strategies for law enforcement, because you actually have to become a strategist today in dealing with police. And that's the reality that we're living in. We all know, keep your hands visible. I would, before the officer approaches the vehicle, I would already have my wallet out. Now, today, I have the habit of, I have a picture of my driver's license on my phone. I also have my registration and car insurance on my phone as well. So I've got it on paper, but I've also got it on my phone. I kind of have everything on my phone. So that may be another strategy there. Why are you stopping me, officer? Don't antagonize the police officer. That's not a good strategy. You know, whether they're right or wrong, don't antagonize the police officer. Name, badge number. Why are you stopping me, officer? Be polite, and you know, hopefully it'll go well. No false moves. Don't get out. Don't cuss the police off. Don't do any of that. I mean, you know, just don't do any of that. And you know, I was asked to do a series of presentations for some of our local youth in the juvenile justice system. I did one presentation, so I did some research, and I created that presentation. Subsequently, I've been asked to do 2 other presentations to our youth here, and that's the presentation that I sent to you, Kai, you know, tips and strategies for how to, you know, effectively manage law enforcement encounters. So that's for if you're driving. Then there's the scenario if you're walking. If you're walking, kind of same kind of thing. If a police officer stops you, if you can, if you're by yourself, I would actually, if I was I would actually ask a bystander that's close by to just stay there and observe. I would actually ask them to do that, and that you know, that's exactly what I would do, because you want another set of eyes. Follow the same format, you know, no moves, you know, respond, you know, just be polite to the police officer and that kind of thing. Get name, badge number. If you're able to make a phone call and let somebody know what's going on, notify somebody in your family, I would do that too, if you got the time and the freedom to do that.
Thank you, Thurston. And now, like I grew up with like Officer Friendly, right? Officer Friendly would come into the school and talk to us about, you know, how to stay safe. And so now in this world of social media where, you know, our children are seeing a totally different view of police officers, how would you recommend parents to have these type of conversations with their children, especially young Black boys? When, you know, they're seeing images of people that are in their peer group, their interactions with cops, they probably already have had experiences. So how important is it for parents to have this conversation with their children, and how should they approach it?
It's probably more important than the birds and the bees discussion. Do you follow me? It's more important. The discussion that we need to have with our children, Kai, surrounding how they need to interact with police officers is by far one of the most important conversations that we can have with them today. More important than sex education. I would rank it higher on the list of priorities than that. And how do you do that? How do you do that? You know, and this is kind of the thing, right? You know, because even, you know, in my own thinking, I don't want to tell my child. And by the way, didn't I tell you that my son is a MP? You know, so I've had a father that was a law enforcement officer, got a son that's a law enforcement officer in the U.S. military. So you've got a police-friendly family, right? You know, you understand what I'm saying? But to have to sit there and have a conversation with my son or my grandchildren even about why they have to be so cautious around police kind of tells them that police are not their friend. But then, I'm just keeping it 100. But then white America gets upset with us when we say police are not our friend. But police, by and large, are not our friend. They're not friendly. Police don't stop. They don't, they go to certain neighborhoods and they, like I described to you, they know everybody in the neighborhood. I've got my friend Andre that's listening from New York. He knows wasn't no police coming up and down, and anytime they came up and down our neighborhood, they was looking for somebody. They didn't stop and say, how you all doing? They didn't stop and talk to us about school and stuff, but they do in white communities. We don't have that. Police historically have an adversarial relationship with us. There's a very important point that I want to share with you that I didn't have, that I want to get across before we get off. I had a lengthy conversation with a good friend of mine that is a supervisory probation officer. And he validated the research that I already did in this area. The majority of parole or conditional release violations, at least on the state level, are not new offenses. They are violated on technicalities, on administrative technicalities, like they missed an appointment, they didn't get, they violated curfew. So you have to understand, once you are in the criminal justice system, you are extremely vulnerable. You have no credibility. What that means is anybody in that system can say you did anything and it sticks. Right? Because you're the criminal. Do you see the point? If your probation officer doesn't like you, he will violate you. Back to prison. Even our child support system needs revamping. That is just a powder keg for undermining families. Here, you have judges that will imprison an individual for failure to pay child support. Lock him up. Now, if he's working, you lock him up, he lost the job that he had. Meanwhile, while he's locked up, the arrears are still increasing. Then what do? To add insult to injury, you take away his driver's license. But then you're going to turn around and tell him that he needs to work or he's going to go back to jail. That kind of stuff. That's what I mean by all the policies that we have in place in America that undermine the fabric of African-American families and the African-American community are absolutely incredible. Even my work in the juvenile justice system. I served 3 terms on the local juvenile justice system. There was a period there where they took the children out of these orange jumpsuits. Now, here's the thing. Why do you have 14, 15, 16, 17-year-old juveniles who are not criminals by the law? They are delinquent. That's the law. They're not criminals, right? You don't get that designation until you're an adult, right? Why do you have them in bright orange jumpsuits? The psychology of that. I cannot tell you how impactful it was for me as a visitor to go see them and talk with them and see them in the orange jumpsuit. So for a period, they took them out of them and let them wear jeans or their regular clothes. And then somebody put them back in jumpsuits, not orange, now they're in green jumpsuits. And if you go there, now you don't have to be a rocket scientist or even an expert in criminal justice to figure out that what they're really doing is preparing them for adult prison. And it's so painful. Let me give you one more example. In those systems, if you're in the practices within the juvenile justice system are almost identical to adult penal institutions. For example, in the adult penal institution, if you want to go to, not all of them, but some of them, if you want to go to art class, or you want to go to therapy, or you want to go to counseling, you have to earn that. Now, I want you to think about that. You shouldn't have to earn or earn points in order to be allowed to participate in certain activities that are where those activities are really part of basic human living. And so those practices also exist in some of our juvenile justice systems, where they have to earn points. It's a privilege to be able to go to, art class or physical education. Do you understand my point? And we understand that from human growth and development, a child's brain is still developing well up to 21, 22 years of age, but definitely it doesn't stop at 16. The state of New York under Governor Cuomo just recently, just a couple of years ago, passed legislation that changed the responsibility age for criminal offenses from 16 to 18. They had 16-year-olds in Rikers Island, our nation's largest detention center, which is a prison. And here's the other thing. Approximately between 50 to 70% of everybody that's locked up in Rikers Island, that's probably the same for every other municipal jail in the country, approximately 50 to 70% of everybody that's in there is in there because they don't have money to pay bail. So we need to eliminate the cash bail system. And it's totally contrary to the Constitution. So Constitution says that you are infers, rather, it doesn't say, it infers per the due process laws of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment that you are innocent until proven guilty. Well, cash bail is really inferring the exact opposite. You are guilty, you must prove yourself innocent. So everywhere we turn, I think it's 2 Corinthians chapter 4, where Paul was writing to the church. Paul says, the Apostle Paul says, we are troubled on every side, but not distressed. But I'm here to tell you, the Black community is troubled on every side, and we are distressed. Everywhere we turn, there's some type of policy that checkmates us and prevents us from improving or prevents us from overcoming other challenges. I didn't mean to go on a tangent.
No, not a tangent at all. Thank you so much. Because a lot of us, we don't know this part about our criminal justice system and the juvenile system unless we've had to be involved in it for some reason. So I think it's important for us to know how the cards are really stacked for our failure, and that we have to, just as you outlined those strategies, we have to develop strategies as a community as to how we're going to respond and show up in our community, in our family, in society, in order to overcome these hurdles, and how we have to work together in order to do that. So thank you for laying all that out.
Right. And so my broader point before you close up, wrap up this great interview, Kai, thank you for the opportunity, is that the data has it that the majority of people that are labeled as reoffenders and are returned back to the criminal justice system, it's not because of recidivism. It's because of administrative violations. Now, if you got a job and they stayed out too late, or the probation officer said that you didn't make your appointment, but you didn't receive it, but you don't have anybody to reconcile that with, because the probation officer's got a lot of power. If he or she says you didn't make it, you didn't make it. You just SOL. you understand what I'm saying? So we need to understand that. So everywhere we turn, we have these types of challenges. The biggest thing that disturbs me about this all is all of these policies and practices that undermine the health of the Black community continues to perpetuate in the public and the media that Black people are animals, that Black people don't know how to be responsible, or the other lie, Black people are lazy. How you gonna call people that have worked for you for free for over 400 years lazy? You understand? That kind of stuff. Yeah, don't get me started.
No, we're gonna have you back for that one.
Exactly.
No, thank you so much, Thurston, for this information. Again, if you have enjoyed the dialogue tonight, or the presentation, I should say, that Thurston gave us, which was awesome, please make sure you give this video a thumbs up, share, and subscribe to the Healing Element Podcast YouTube channel. If you are watching via Facebook, please also share this video and also give it a thumbs up. So Thurston, as we wind down our conversation this evening, you raised so many good points for us to begin to really learn, research, and have a clear understanding of history. It's so funny that our whole dialogue started over policy, a policy talk. Right. So I think that's funny that that all the conversations that we have surrounded that, and what we need to do as a community to address these issues that we're experiencing, which, as we know, are all connected to race. So as we wind down the interview this evening, are there any resources that you would recommend for members of our community to go to just to get some more information about knowing their rights, that we can provide to them? If you could share that. And also, you have a speaking engagement coming up, so I want to make sure that you do plug that in as well.
Right. Well, you know what? Thank you so much. So here's three things. These are three awesome books that I recommend for your audience. One is When Affirmative Action Was Right: An Untold History of Racial Inequality in the 20th Century America, by Ivor Katz-Nelson. I'll repeat that. When Affirmative Action Was Right: An Untold History of Racial Inequality in 20th Century America, by Ivor Katz-Nelson with a K. The second one is The Color of Money: Black Banks and the Racial Wealth Gap, by Mercer. I can't even read my own writing. By Mercer Baradar.
Yeah. Oh, that book I actually do. I listened to a book on tape. Powerful book.
Yeah, by Mercer Baradar. The Color of Money: Black Banks and the Racial Wealth Gap. And the last one is The Color of Law: A Forgotten History of How Our Government Segregated America, by Richard Rothstein. Three excellent books. The Color of Law: A Forgotten History of How Our Government Segregated America. These are three good reads that I encourage your audience. Now you asked me about what kind of resources. Well, you have the Southern Poverty Law Center. You know, that's one of our oldest. The American Civil Liberties Union is also a great source for policy information, and they provide data on practices, practices of inequality and discrimination, who's doing what. They track some of the work that the Justice Department is doing. They track, how well they're doing in areas and how they're not doing so well in some other areas. So those are two that come right to mind that I think your listeners or your viewers might be interested in.
Great, thank you so much. So I also dropped them in the comments section, so that way you have the books and also the other resources that Thurston provided. So as we close out, I'm just going to pop back up the image that you provided us with as we kind of end out. Are there any last words for this episode, Thurston, that you wanted to leave our audience with tonight?
No, it's been great. Been a great discussion. I believe we could have actually sat here for another hour and a half, and it probably wouldn't have seemed beyond 15 minutes. The conversation was so good.
Yeah.
But I thank you for the opportunity to come on your podcast. It's been a great discussion.
Thank you so much. And thank you everyone that has been listening. Thank you for your support. Again, please share this important information with your friends and family. This is Thurston's second time on the podcast, so don't worry. Right after this, I'm going to talk to him in the green room to set up a third appearance. So don't fret, working on getting them back. But hopefully the information provided was helpful. If you would like to learn more about the services that I offer, learn more about the podcast, please visit my website, kaimarie.com, and also follow me on social media, on Instagram at The Healing Element Podcast, also on Instagram, KaiMarie_LLC, and also, of course, Facebook, Kai Marie. So thank you all for joining us tonight. Join me again all weekend. This weekend is Return of the King, so I will be on live. We have some fabulous guests on for that topic. We're going to be talking about this gender war going on in the Black community, and we'll also be talking, that'll be on Saturday, and then on Sunday, we'll be talking about investments, how you can set, this is all about Black men this weekend. We're talking about investments, how Black men can set up their retirement, the importance of life insurance, and how to set all that up. So make sure you stay tuned. That's this weekend at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, live on Facebook and YouTube. Again, Thurston, thank you so much for joining me this evening. And I hope everyone has a great night, and we will see you again soon. Bye-bye.
Thanks for having me. Bye, Kai. Take care.